Today's class we will conclude our topic cerebrovascular diseases. In today's class we will discuss about the Stroke syndromes. So the stroke syndromes have been broadly classified into three groups. First, the large vessel stroke within the anterior circulation. Second, large vessel stroke within the posterior circulation. Third is a small vessel stroke involving either the anterior circulation or the posterior circulation. So what is anterior circulation? What is posterior circulation? We will discuss in the subsequent slide. What is anterior circulation? So the internal carotid artery and its branches comprises the anterior circulation of the brain. So we all know that the arch of aorta from first is the brachiocephalic artery. From the brachiocephalic artery, right subclavian artery and the right common carotid artery. Then there is a left subclavian artery. Then there is a left common carotid artery, and then there is a left subclavian artery. So the common carotid artery gives rise to the anterior carotid artery and the external carotid artery. This internal carotid artery and its branches forms the anterior circulation of the brain. So in the brain there are three main cerebral arteries: anterior cerebral artery, middle cerebral artery, and the posterior cerebral artery. Out of these three main cerebral arteries, anterior and the middle cerebral artery arises from the internal carotid artery and forms the anterior circulation. So the occlusion can be due to some atherosclerotic disease or can be due to embolism. So as we all know that the occlusion can be emboli or can be due to thrombosis. And occlusion of each major intracranial vessel has got distinct clinical manifestation. When the anterior cerebral artery occludes, when the middle cerebral artery occludes, or when the posterior cerebral artery occludes, the patient will have got the different clinical features. First is the occlusion of the middle cerebral artery. So occlusion of the proximal middle cerebral artery or one of its major branches is most often due to an embolus rather than the intracranial atherothrombosis. So occlusion of the middle cerebral artery is mostly due to embolism rather than the thrombosis. And there is a collateral formation by the leptomeningeal vessels which prevents the MCA stenosis from becoming symptomatic. So this is the beauty of our body, that whenever there is a occlusion in any part of the body, the collaterals are formed, and these collaterals prevents the circulation to the affected part. Same here. When the middle cerebral artery occludes or one of its branches occludes, there is a formation of collateral vessels, and it prevents the MCA stenosis from becoming symptomatic. So symptoms of any patient depends upon the collateral formation. If the good collaterals are formed, then these symptoms will be minimal. But if the collaterals are not formed or they are not good, then the patient will be more symptomatic. And the middle cerebral artery, it has been broadly categorized into two segments: M1 segment and the P2 segment, M2 segment. Same, the posterior cerebral circulation and the anterior cerebral circulation are according to our convenience, we have divided into these two segments. One is a proximal segment, which is known as the M1 segment, and second is a distal segment, which is known as the M2 segment. So the proximal MCA, also known as the M1 segment, it gives rise to lenticulostriate arteries which supplies the following: and putamen, outer globus pallidus, posterior limb of the internal capsule, adjacent corona radiata, and most of the caudate nucleus. So these parts of the brain are supplied from the M1 segment. And there is a M2 segment. What is M2 segment? In the distal part, distal MCA, it divides into superior division and the inferior division. And the superior division of the MCA supplies the frontal and superior parietal complex, while the inferior division supplies the inferior parietal and temporal complex. So there are main two segments of the middle cerebral artery: M1 segment and the M2 segment. And occlusion of the entire MCA at its origin with limited distal collaterals leads to the following clinical findings. When the middle cerebral artery occludes at its origin and the collaterals are not formed, then the patient will have the contralateral hemiplegia, contralateral hemianesthesia, homonymous hemianopia, 1 to 2 day gauge preference to the ipsilateral side, and dysarthria. So these are the features when the patient has having occlusion of the middle cerebral artery at its origin. And when the dominant hemisphere is involved, then there will be a global aphasia. Global aphasia means the patient have Broca's as well as Wernicke's aphasia. And but when there is a non-dominant hemisphere involved, the patient will have the anosognosia along with constructional apraxia and Nedled. So these are the difference when the dominant hemisphere is involved and when the non-dominant hemisphere is involved. So majority of the persons are right-handed, so the left hemisphere is dominant. But in some cases, when the patient is left-handed, then the right hemisphere becomes dominant. So this is the meaning of dominant hemisphere and the non-dominant hemisphere. So these are the features when the middle cerebral artery occludes at its origin, and what is complete syndrome and what is partial syndrome. Complete when there is a complete occlusion of the middle cerebral artery, and when there is incomplete occlusion of the middle cerebral artery, or there is a good collateral formation, that is known as the partial syndrome. So this is the meaning of complete syndrome as well as the partial syndrome. Now come to the next part, that the anterior cerebral artery. Same, the anterior cerebral artery is also divided into two parts, A1 segment and the A2 segment. A1 segment is pre-terminal and A2 segment is post-terminal. This A1 segment, it connects the internal carotid artery to the anterior communicating artery. It gives rise to deep penetrating branches which supplies the anterior limb of the internal capsule, amygdala, anterior perforate substance, anterior hypothalamus, and inferior part of the head of the caudate nucleus. So these are the brain parts which are supplied by the A1 segment of the anterior cerebral artery. A stands for anterior cerebral artery, M stands for middle cerebral artery, and P stands for posterior cerebral artery. And the A2 is the post-terminal, that is distal to the anterior communicating artery. And occlusion of the anterior cerebral artery, it is usually well tolerated due to collateral flow through the anterior communicating and through the middle cerebral artery and the posterior cerebral artery. Whenever the posterior or the middle cerebral artery occludes, the patient will have more clinical manifestations rather when the patient has got the occlusion of the anterior cerebral artery, because the anterior cerebral artery has got the good collateral formation. Now come to the another third part, that the anterior choroidal artery. Whenever there is occlusion of the anterior choroidal artery, it also leads to the stroke within the anterior circulation. The anterior choroidal artery, it arises from the internal carotid artery and it supplies the posterior limb of the internal capsule and the white matter posterolateral to it, through which geniculocalcarine fibers passes, and anterior choroidal stenosis are often caused by the in situ thrombosis and iatrogenic occlusion during the surgical clipping of aneurysms arising from the internal carotid artery. So the occlusion of the anterior carotid artery, it usually due to in situ thrombosis, and due to the clinical picture, it depends upon the cause of ischemia, whether the cause is due to thrombus, embolism, or the low flow, and the cortex is supplied by the MCA territory is affected most often, and it may go unnoticed with a competent circle of Willis. So the occlusion of internal carotid artery also leads to the stroke within the anterior circulation. Now come the next part, that the occlusion of the common carotid artery. The occlusion of the common carotid artery also leads to stroke within the anterior circulation, and the sign and symptoms are same with the internal carotid artery occlusion. There will be jaw claudication, and when there is a bilateral common carotid artery occlusion, it leads to the Takayasu arteritis. Now come to the posterior circulation. So anterior circulation, when the occlusion is in the internal carotid artery, common carotid artery, anterior choroidal artery, anterior cerebral artery, or the middle cerebral artery. And what occurs when the occlusion occurs in the posterior cerebral artery? So there is a lead into the stroke within the posterior circulation. So what is posterior circulation? So the posterior circulation is composed of paired vertebral arteries. They join to form the basilar artery, and it divides into the paired posterior cerebral artery. Just go into the anatomy. So there is a subclavian artery, right subclavian artery, and the left subclavian artery. From the left, from both the subclavian arteries, two vertebral arteries arises. These vertebral arteries joins, they form the basilar artery, and this basilar artery, it divides into the posterior cerebral artery. So whenever there is a occlusion in any of these parts, it leads to the stroke within the posterior circulation. And the features of stroke within the anterior circulation are very different from the stroke within the posterior circulation. In the anterior circulation, usually the paresis hemiplegia or the hemiparesis part is more prominent rather than the stroke within the posterior circulation. When there is a stroke within the posterior circulation, usually patients will have more more nausea, vertigo, vomiting rather than the paresis. So this this is the anatomy, and these arteries give rise to the circumferential and deep penetrating arteries, which supplies the cerebellum, brainstem, diencephalon, hippocampus, medial temporal and occipital lobe. An occlusion of the each vessel produces its own distinctive symptom. Now come to the occlusion of the posterior cerebral artery. So there is a posterior cerebral artery usually originates in from the basilar artery, but in majority of cases it happens. In 75% cases it originates from the bifurcation of the basilar artery, but there are some anomalies also in the anatomy. In 20% cases, one arises from the ipsilateral internal carotid artery by the posterior communicating artery, and in 5% cases both arises from the respective ipsilateral carotid internal carotid artery. So you should know about the variation in the anatomy also. In majority of the cases, but it arises from the basilar artery. And when the posterior cerebral artery occludes, it leads to the posterior cerebral artery syndromes. And these posterior cerebral artery syndromes usually results from atheroma formation or emboli which lodges at the top of basilar artery. And it may also be due to vertebral artery dissection or fibromuscular dysplasia. So these PCA syndromes may be due to embolism, may be due to thrombosis, may be due to dissection or due to fibromuscular dysplasia. And these are also they subdivided into two parts, P1 syndrome and the P2 syndrome. When the occlusion in the proximal part, it is known as the P1 part, or when the occlusion in the distal part, it is known as the P2 syndrome. So P1 syndrome is involving the midbrain, subthalamic and thalamic signs, and due to disease of the proximal P1 segment or its penetrating branches. P2 syndrome having the cortical, temporal and occipital lobe signs, and it is due to occlusion of the P2 segment distal to the junction of the posterior cerebral artery with the posterior communicating artery. So this is the P1 syndrome and the P2 syndrome of the posterior cerebral artery. Apart from the occlusion of the posterior cerebral artery, there may be occlusion of the vertebral artery and the posterior cerebellar arteries. These occlusion also lead to the stroke within the posterior circulation. And the vertebral arteries, it arises from the innominate artery on the right side and the subclavian artery on the left side. And this vertebral artery has been divided into four segments, V1, V2, V3 and V4 segment. Apart from the occlusion of the vertebral artery, the posterior inferior cerebral artery can also occlude, which leads to the stroke within the posterior circulation. Now, occlusion of the basilar artery. So the basilar artery, it supplies the base of the pons and the superior cerebellum, and it falls into three groups: paramedian, short circumferential and the bilateral non-circumferential. So these are the branches which arises from the basilar artery, and the basilar artery usually supplies the brainstem and the cerebellum, and these are the branches of the basilar artery. And occlusion of the basilar artery can occur due to atherothrombotic disease. So atheromatous lesions occur anywhere along the basilar trunk, but are more frequent in the proximal basilar and distal vertebral segments. And the clinical picture depends upon the availability of retrograde collateral flow from the posterior communicating arteries, and emboli from the heart or the proximal vertebral or basilar segments are more commonly responsible for the top of the basilar syndromes. And whenever there is a complete basilar occlusion, it leads to the constellation of bilateral non-tract signs, sensory and motor, with signs of cranial nerve and cerebellar dysfunction. Now come to the, so this is the stroke within the anterior circulation and stroke within the posterior circulation. So now come to the diagnostic part, that is the imaging part. In imaging, first is the CT stain. So identify or exclude the hemorrhage as the cause of the stroke, and they identify the extraparenchymal hemorrhages, neoplasms, abscesses and other conditions masking as the stroke. So this is the advantage of the CT stain. First, CT stain will help in differentiating whether the stroke is due to ischemia or due to hemorrhage. Second, it will also exclude the mimics of the stroke, whether mimics of the stroke can be due to malignancies, any abscess or any other condition which can mask as the stroke. So this is the advantage of the CT stain. And CT stain obtained in the first several hours after an infarction generally shows no abnormality. So the advantage of the CT stain is also only that it excludes the hemorrhage, but it is not necessary that it will produce the changes of infarction. An infarct may not be seen reliably for 24 to 48 hours. Suppose the patient has developed the stroke within hours and you go for CT scan, it can exclude the hemorrhage, but it cannot. But in certain cases, but there are more chances that it will not produce the infarction. And CT stain may fail to show small ischemic stroke in the posterior fossa because of the bone artifact also on the cortical surface. So these are the drawbacks of the CT stain when the stroke is in the posterior cerebral circulation. So the contrast enhanced CT allows the visualization of venous structures, and we can upgrade the CT from, we can go for CT angiography, which identifies the carotid disease and intracranial vascular occlusions, area of the brain infarct, ischemic penumbra after IV bolus of contrast, and it is sensitive in detecting the subarachnoid hemorrhage. So these are the advantages of CT angio over the conventional CT. But non-contrast CT is the imaging modality of choice in patients with the acute stroke. So whenever a patient of stroke presents to you in emergency, you should go for non-contrast CT because it is easily available, easy to do, and there are no any certain different contraindications for non-contrast CT. This now come to the further workup. We can go for MRI, which reliably documents the extent and location of the infarction in all areas of the brain, including the posterior fossa and the cortical surface. So there are two drawbacks of the CT: when the stroke is in the posterior circulation and when there is involvement of the cortex. These are not reliably documented by the CT, but these structures can be delineated by the MRI. So MRI can lead to the stroke within the posterior fossa and these changes on the cortical surface. But it is less sensitive than CT in detecting the acute blood. So MRI is less sensitive than CT in detecting the acute blood, and there is some refinement of the MRI that is known as the FLAIR. That is FLAIR, it is more sensitive for early brain infarction than the MR sequences or the CT. So these are the advantages of FLAIR over the conventional MRI or the CT. And MRI perfusion studies uses IV gadolinium contrast, and MR angiography, it is highly sensitive for stenosis of extracranial internal carotid arteries and large intracranial vessels. So we can go for MR conventional. Apart from the conventional MRI, we can go for MR angio also. And MRI with fat saturation visualizes extra or intracranial arterial dissection. So compared to the CT, MRI, it is less sensitive for, if we compare the CT versus MRI, so MRI, it is less sensitive for acute blood products, it is more expensive, time consuming, less readily available, and it is limited with claustrophobia. So the certain patient will not go for MRI because of the fear of closed spaces, which is known as the claustrophobia, because CT scan usually takes 5 to 10 minutes, but MRI will take at least 30 to 40 minutes. And there is a very irritating sound of the magnetic field in the MRI. That's why some patient will not tolerate the MRI and they have to go for CT. And we can upgrade the CT. We can go for either the contrast CT or we can go for CT angio. And MRI, it is more useful outside the acute period by more clearly defining the extent of tissue injury and discriminating new from the old regions of brain infarction. So this is the advantage of MRI from the CT. Suppose we have gone for the CT in a patient of stroke and CT is normal, so there might be chances either the lesions are not clearly visible on the CT or they are not developed. So we have to go for MRI. Second advantage is that CT will not tell you whether this infarct is a recent one or it is the old one. But MRI can differentiate whether it is a new infarct or it is a old infarct. And we can go for cerebral angiography also. Conventional X-ray cerebral angiography, it is the gold standard for identifying and quantifying the atherosclerotic stenosis of the cerebral arteries and characterizing the other pathologies. And it is coupled with endovascular techniques for cerebral revascularization. So cerebral angiography can be the diagnostic as well as the therapeutic also. But there are certain risks with cerebral angiography like arterial damage, groin hemorrhage, and embolic stroke and renal failure from contrast nephropathy. and it is reserved when the less invasive means are inadequate. So usually cerebral angiography is done in selected cases. Apart from the CT, MRI and angiography, we can go for ultrasound, that is known as the transcranial Doppler. So TCD or the transcranial Doppler, it can detect stenotic lesions in the large intracranial arteries because such lesions increases the systolic flow velocity. So we can go for Doppler also. It can assist thrombolysis and improve the large artery recanalization following the TPA administration. So if we go for thrombolysis, we can see through the Doppler whether the thrombolysis is successful or not. Apart from Doppler, there are other techniques like known as the perfusion techniques. So both Xenon techniques, that is known as Xenon CT and PET, they can quantify the cerebral blood flow. They are generally used for the research but can be useful for determining the significance of arterial stenosis and planning for revascularization surgery. And CT perfusion, it increases the sensitivity of detecting the ischemia and it can measure the ischemic penumbra. So we can go for perfusion techniques also. So this is all about the ischemia. Now come in the short intracranial hemorrhage. So intracranial hemorrhage means there is a bleed within the brain and it can be of different types. So hemorrhages are classified by their location and underlying vascular pathology. So this is the classification based on the location. First is the subdural hemorrhage and the epidural hemorrhage. Subdural means below the dura, epidural means that is the outside the dura, that is the extradural hemorrhage. Subdural and the epidural hemorrhages, they are usually caused by the trauma. Subarachnoid hemorrhage, that is below the arachnoid, it is produced by the trauma and the rupture of intracranial aneurysm. Intraparenchymal and intraventricular hemorrhage, that is within the brain. Intraparenchymal means within the brain parenchyma, intraventricular means within the ventricles. So these are the different types of hemorrhages: epidural, subdural, subarachnoid, intraparenchymal and intraventricular. And diagnosis: intracranial hemorrhage is often discovered on the non-contrast CT imaging of the brain during the acute evolution of stroke. So these can be easily diagnosed through the non-contrast CT, and CT, it is preferred method for the acute stroke evaluation over MRI since it is more sensitive on the acute blood. And in the emergency management of intracranial hemorrhage, same ABC, there is airway management, blood pressure control and the pathway. So airway, reduction in the level of consciousness is common and progressive. Initial blood pressure is maintained until CT stain results are reviewed, and the BP can be safely lowered using nitardipine, labetalol or esmolol. So if the patient is having the intracranial hemorrhage and the blood pressure is high, it can be safely reduced with the use of these drugs. What are the advantages of these drugs? These drugs reduces blood pressure very slowly. They will not produce very rapid falling of blood pressure, because the very rapid fall of blood pressure can lead to the more damage rather than the beneficial part. And usually the blood pressure is not made normal. To make normal, it is usually remains slightly above the normal. So we have to reduce the blood pressure from which, if the patient is having a high reading of systolic blood pressure, it is usually reduced up to 150, 160, and the diastolic is reduced up to 100 to 110. So this is the normal pressure. But the mean arterial pressure should be less than 130 millimeter mercury unless an increased intracranial pressure is suspected. And stuporous or comatose patients generally are treated presumptively for elevated intracranial pressure with tracheal intubation, hyperventilation, mannitol, and elevation of the head of the bed. This mannitol acts as a diuretic and reduces the cerebral edema. And this intraparenchymal hemorrhage, it is the most common type of intracranial hemorrhage, particularly high in the Asians and the blacks. The major causes of intraparenchymal hemorrhage are the hypertension, trauma, cerebral amyloid angiopathy, and risk factors are the advanced age, heavy alcohol consumption, cocaine and methamphetamine use. And this cocaine and methamphetamine use is most important cause in the young. So the intraparenchymal hemorrhage is the most common type of intracranial hemorrhage. And hypertensive intraparenchymal hemorrhage, it usually results from the spontaneous rupture of small penetrating artery deep in the brain. It can also be due to hemorrhagic disorders, neoplasm, vascular malformations, and the most common sites are the basal ganglia. So the basal ganglia is the most common site when you are suspecting the intraparenchymal hemorrhage. And in basal ganglia, especially the putamen. and other sites are the thalamus, cerebellum, and pons. And this hemorrhage may lead to the herniation and death, and most develops over 30 to 90 minutes compared to the hemorrhage caused by the anticoagulant therapy which evolved for 24 to 48 hours.